Hello, I'm Hassan Ajami. I'm a Lebanese author and a freelance journalist. I also work at Thunderbird School of Global Management. I teach there Arabic language and Arab-Islamic culture. Today our topic is Arab-Islamic communication and modernity. Before starting to discuss the relationship of communication and modernity in the Arab-Islamic culture, I would like to review what we already said previously concerning the communication patterns. In the West, communication is transmission of information such that information is equal to surprise over the probability of the occurrence of the message. But in the Arab-Islamic culture, communication is transmission of information such that information is the probability of the occurrence of the message over surprise. So the communication pattern in the Arab-Islamic culture is the opposite of the communication pattern in the West. In the West, surprise should be maximum, but in the Arab-Islamic culture, surprise should be minimum. So the Arab-Islamic communication pattern contradicts the basic communication pattern in the West. So let's look carefully here concerning the West. As we mentioned, surprise should be maximum in order to have maximum information and therefore a successful communication. But in the Arab-Islamic culture, surprise should be minimum in order to have maximum information and therefore successful communication. In this sense, the communication pattern in the Arab-Islamic culture contradicts the Western communication pattern. Here in the West, surprise should be maximum, but in the Arab-Islamic culture, surprise should be minimum. Now, we'll concentrate on the Arab-Islamic culture and the relationship between communication in the Arab-Islamic culture and modernity. Here in this context, we're using modernity in a specific sense. Modernity is equal to science plus democracy. Modernity is the acceptance and development of science. At the same time, modernity is the acceptance and development of democracy. So we're using modernity in this sense. It is a fact that in the Arab-Islamic culture, modernity failed. There's a strong tendency in the Arab-Islamic culture to reject science, and also there is a strong tendency to reject democracy in the Arab-Islamic culture nowadays. And the question is why? Why did modernity fail? Why there are such strong tendencies to reject science and democracy in the Arab-Islamic culture today and for decades now? In fact, the communication pattern in the Arab-Islamic culture explains why modernity failed in the Arab-Islamic culture. First of all, let's look at science. Science is full of surprises because scientists, as you know, always develop new scientific theories, and therefore they always surprise us. In this sense, in science, surprise is maximum. But according to the Arab-Islamic communication pattern, surprise should be minimum. Therefore, science contradicts the communication pattern in the Arab-Islamic culture. And therefore, the communication pattern followed by the Arabs and the Muslims led to the rejection of science. Similarly, if we look at democracy, also we would see that democracy is full of surprises. It surprises us. Why? Because we always change the ruler and the government, and they would have new economic, political, educational plans. So in this sense, also, democracy is full of surprises. And of course, in democracy, we are free to behave in any way that we would like to behave. And also, we are free to develop new ideas. In this sense, in a democracy, surprise is maximum. Now, since surprise is maximum in democracy, therefore democracy itself contradicts the communication pattern followed by the Arabs and the Muslims. Because according to the communication pattern followed by the Arabs and the Muslims, surprise should be minimum. But in democracy, surprise is maximum. So democracy contradicts the communication pattern of the Arabs and the Muslims. And therefore, because the Arabs and the Muslims are following this communication pattern according to which surprise should be minimum, this itself led to the rejection of democracy. In this sense, this communication pattern followed by the Arabs and the Muslims led to the failure of modernity because it led to the rejection of science and to the rejection of democracy. Here we would like to add another point, which is the following. Al-ijtihad in the Arab-Islamic world is closed. What do I mean by al-ijtihad? Al-ijtihad means the development of new interpretations of Islam. It is a fact that according to most of the Muslims, not all of the Muslims, according to most of the Muslims, new interpretations of Islam are rejected. So in this sense, al-ijtihad is closed. Why? Also, this communication pattern followed by the Arabs and the Muslims explains why al-ijtihad is closed. Why new interpretations of Islam are rejected. They only want to rely on old interpretations of Islam in that sense. If we look at the supposedly new interpretations of Islam, by definition, they are supposed to be new, and therefore they are supposed to surprise us. So, in the new interpretations of Islam, surprise is supposed to be maximum. But according to the communication pattern followed by the Arabs and the Muslims, surprise is minimum. Therefore, the new interpretations of Islam contradict the communication pattern followed by the Arabs and the Muslims. It follows that since the Arabs and the Muslims follow this communication pattern, in light of which surprise should be minimum, this fact itself led to the rejection of new interpretations of Islam. So now we are explaining why al-ijtihad is closed in that sense. Why most of the Arabs and Muslims reject new interpretations of Islam. Of course, we need new interpretations of religion and of Islam and of the Quran in order to modernize in the true sense. But this communication pattern followed by the Arabs and the Muslims today led to the rejection of new interpretations of Islam, and therefore this communication pattern led to the failure of modernity. All of this implies that in order for the Arabs and the Muslims to truly modernize, they should shift from this communication pattern and accept and follow the Western communication pattern. Only then they will be truly able to modernize in the sense of accepting science and democracy and establishing democratic states. If we look at the Western communication pattern, surprise should be maximum in order to have maximum information and therefore successful communication, because communication is transmission of information. So according to the Western communication pattern, surprise should be maximum. But it is also given that in science and democracy, surprise is maximum. Therefore, this communication pattern in the West would ultimately lead to the acceptance and development of science and democracy. All of this shows that if the Arabs and the Muslims shift from their communication pattern and accept and follow the Western communication pattern, then they will be able to truly modernize in the sense of accepting science and democracy and developing scientific theories and developing democratic states. Of course, all of what I said implies another fact, which is important to emphasize it here at the end, which is the following. So, in the West, science and democracy were developed in the West. Science and democracy were developed in the West. Why? Because of the Western communication pattern. So my claim here is that since in the West we follow this Western communication pattern, this fact itself led to the development of science and democracy in the West. Because as I mentioned, surprise should be maximum according to this communication pattern, but in science and democracy, surprise is maximum. Therefore, this communication pattern would ultimately lead to the development of science and democracy. And therefore, this Western communication pattern explains why science and democracy were developed in the West. Thank you. We'll stop here.